First unit is about money. What can you do with the money you earn? What can you do when you don't quite have enough money and you want to buy something significant like a car or a furniture set? But like I said, you don't quite have enough money. What can you do? Well, this leads to the whole notions of interest and credit. So when we invest money into some bank or some other financial institution, we earn interest. That means, in other words, the bank or the financial institution is paying us money in order to store our money with them. Okay. On the other side, if we don't have enough money to buy something, we can still buy it on what is called credit, where you promise to pay a bank or a credit card company or some other institution. You promise to pay them a certain amount that you borrow back, but then they'll also charge you some interest for borrowing that money. So that's really, that's really what everything's about in this unit. What's going on here? Come on. Come on. What happened? Let me just pause this for a second. If you invest money, you will get interest. If you borrow money or buy something on credit, you will have to pay interest. There's two main types of interest that you can pay. Simple interest and something called compound interest. Okay? Simple interest is what we're going to start with. And all you do with simple interest is however much you invest or even however much you borrow, and depending on how long you invest or borrow it for, and depending on how long the interest rate or how much the interest rate is, that determines how much interest you get or you have to pay. And it's a very simple formula for simple interest, hence the name. To calculate interest I, we take something called the principal amount that you borrow or you invest times your rate of interest times the time in years that you invest it for or borrow it for. So I represents the interest you get or you have to pay. P is something we call the principal. And that is the original amount borrowed or invested. R represents the rate of interest. You'll be told the rate of interest as a percent. But when you calculate using interest, you got to change percent to decimal. And it's pretty straightforward. So rate of interest as a decimal. And we'll, after we do a couple of examples. And T represents the length of time in years. The time has to be expressed in years. So if you borrow something for if you borrow money for 6 months, you have to convert 6 months to a year. Well, 6 months is half a year. So we'd use 1/2 or 0.5. Okay? If you borrowed something for 100 days, you'd have to change that to years by dividing it by 365. So let's just see how we can use this formula. So Olive Branch has invests $1,500 in a financial institution that offers her an interest rate of 4%. You'll often see this. You'll often see this phrase, per annum. Per annum just means per year. So we're asked for 3 situations. How much interest will she earn if she keeps the money in for 3 years? How much money will she earn if she keeps it in for 7 months? And how much will she earn if she keeps it in for 100 days? Well, we still use this formula. So I is what we're trying to figure out. That's the unknown. P is how much money she invests or borrowed. Well, in this case, it's 1,500. The rate of interest is 4%. I have to change that to decimal. To change from percent to decimal, just take the decimal point in percent, which is right after the 4, and move it back 2 spaces. So the rate that we're going to use in our formula is 0.04. You just move it back 2. That's all. And T is 3. So there's the numbers you're going to multiply. 1,500 times 0.04 times 3. And when you calculate that, and you should have a calculator, a scientific calculator will do, you'll get $180. So if she left that investment alone for 3 years, she'd get $180 when she decided to pull it out or cash it in. How much if she only did it for 7 months? Well, obviously it's going to be less, but it's still the same setup. The interest is unknown. The principal is still $1,500. The rate of interest is 4%, or moving the decimal point back to 0.04. Here, the time changes. Because remember, the time has to be in years. So how do I express 7 months in years? Well, how many months are there in a year? 12. So that's what I would have to multiply by. Because it's 7 out of 12 months. The time is not yet 1 year. It's less than 1 year. So for this one, you would do 1,500 times 0.04 times 7, and then divide 12. And you do that, and you would get an answer of $35. Same question, but this time she only invested for 100 days. So I is what we're still trying to find. P is still $1,500. R is still 0.04, but T changes. What do you think? 100 days out of how many in a year? 365. So this is what you would multiply. So if it's in months, you're going to have to do the months divide 12. If it's in days, you're going to have to do the days divide 365. So when we do that, we get 1,500 times 0.04 times 100 and then divided by 365. That's going to give us approximately $16.44, which makes sense because 100 days is not a long time, so you're not going to make a lot of interest out of it. We can use this formula to answer different types of problems. Like what happens if you're given the interest, the principal, and the rate, and you're asked to find the time? What happens if you're given the interest, the principal, and the time, and you're asked to find the rate? Or you're given the interest and the rate and the time, and you're asked to find the principal? Well, we just use that formula and we work backwards. So here, how would I get, let's say I wanted to get a formula to calculate the principal. Right now, P is multiplied by R is multiplied by T. To get P by itself, would I not just divide by RT? And if I divide that side by RT, I have to divide that side by RT. So if it's the principal, how much you invest or borrow that you're trying to figure out, you got to take the interest and you got to divide it by the rate multiplied by the time. What if I wanted to figure out the rate? Well, if I wanted to get the rate by itself, I'd have to divide by PT, which means I have to divide the interest by PT. So to find the rate, it's going to be the interest divided by the principal multiplied by the time. And finally, what if I was given the interest, but I wanted to find the time? And so I was given the interest, the principal, the rate, and I wanted to find the time. Well, to get time by itself, I divide this side by PR to cancel it out, which means I got to divide the other side of the equal sign by PR. So to find the time, we take the interest rate, divide the principal times the rate. Every time you guys do an assessment, you will be given a resource sheet, meaning you can put whatever formulas on it you want. You can write whatever notes on it you want. So right now, I would make sure that whenever you make a resource sheet for this formula goes on it. And these three formulas go on it. For sure. Because then it's just a matter of plugging in the right numbers in the correct spot and doing the correct operations. So let's look at a couple questions where we're asked to find some of these. So what are we given? Which one of these four is the question mark? Are we given the interest? Yes, $200. Are we given the principal? So she invested a certain amount of money. What amount did she invest? So it's the principal we don't know. We don't know how much she invested. So the principal, that's what we're trying to figure out. The rate of interest was 5%, but to change it to a decimal, go back 2 decimal places to 0.05. And the time, remember, is in years. It says 4 years. So there's the information we have, and we know what we need to find. So using those formulas on the previous page, to find the principal, we take the interest divided by the rate of interest multiplied by the time. So to find our answer here, it's going to be $200 divided by 0.05 times 4. Now remember, you've got to do this first and then divide by 200 after. Whenever you've got a division bar, you got to do everything up top first, everything on the bottom, and then divide at the end. So 4 times 0.05 will give you 0.2. And then 200 divides 0.2 using a calculator will give you $1,000. So there's an example where the principal was unknown. How about example 3? Again, when you get a question like this, write down what you know, write down what you're trying to figure out. So Brookpool has $2,400 to invest in a financial institution. What does the 2,400 represent? Which of the 4 letters? P. It would represent P. Calculate the annual rate of interest. So that tells us that R is the unknown. If she plans to earn $300, which is her interest, at the end of 2 years, which is the time. So now going back to the formulas, to find the rate of interest, we take 300, the interest, divided by 2,400 times 2. And we do the multiplication on the bottom first. And we get 300 divide 4,800. And that will give us, if using a calculator, 0.0625. But remember, the rate of interest should be in percent. How do I change? Remember, how do I go from percent to decimal? I go back 2 decimal places. How do I go from decimal to percent? go forward 2. So 0.0625 would be the same as 6.25%. That's how I'm going to add that at the end of this, just to remind you. Okay, the last question. Again, we've got one of these situations. So 4 pieces of our formula. Wade Lake borrows $5,000 from the bank. Well, if he's borrowing $5,000, that $5,000 is the principal. At an interest rate of 4% per year. So we're told the interest rate. And 4% in decimal becomes 0.04. Calculate the number of days it took. So the time is unknown. And the interest that he earned, or that he had to pay, was $360. So again, going to our formula, this time to find T, you're going to have the interest divided by the principal times the rate. So the interest is 360 divided by the principal 5,000 times the rate 0.04. And we've got to do the multiplication first. And when we do 5,000 times 0.04, we should get 200. 5,000 times 0.04 gives us 200. Remember, T is in years. So when we do that division at the end, we get 1.8 years. But I got to convert that to days. How do I convert years to days? 1 year is how many days? 365. 2 years is how many days? 365 times 2. 3 years is 365 times 3. 1.8 years is 365 times 1.8. Which gives us 657 days. Okay, just to add this, to convert from percent to decimal, move the decimal point back 2 spaces. Or 2 place values. So if I wanted to go, say, 6%, well, 6% is the same as 6.0%. To change it to decimal, start at the decimal point here, move it 2 place values back, and you're going to get 0.06 as a decimal. Because you will have to be doing a fair amount of converting between the two, so you should be familiar with how to convert. To convert from decimal to percent, you do the opposite. Move the decimal point forward 2 place values. So say, for example, you wanted to go from zero point 0.0825, and I want to go to percent. I start at the decimal point and go forward 2 place values, and that gives me my percent. Okay.